The 49ers have the best offense in the NFL, despite the fact that they ranked 20th in pass block win rate at 55.6%, 23rd in run block win rate at 70%. And they're doing this with Trent Williams, maybe one of the greatest left tackles in the history of football, sitting there at left tackle in the key spot. So there's no question. We've already kind of hit it here. The pressure on Purdy definitely caused some problems in the Super Bowl. As far as I'm concerned, it's Williams at left tackle, it's Banks at left guard, and then it's question mark across the board. You've watched the Niners and the Eagles. The Eagles arguably have had the best line in offensive line. I really believe that football starts with your offensive line. And yet the 49ers have been able to have the best offense with the best weapons, one of the best play callers, really good play from Purdy. But they can't climb the top of the mountain because they have ignored their offensive line. What do you do here? I mean, Colton McKivitz ranked 50th among qualified tackles and pass block win rate. Jake Brendel was 25th among centers. They badly need an infusion of talent along that offensive line. How do they solve this without making trades? Because I'm looking at, I looked at the free agent market, Chase, and there's some good guards, but there's not really maybe Trent Brown. I mean, there's outside of Trent Brown, I don't see a tackle that they could sign that would really make a difference. I think you got to solve that in the draft. And then when you get into the draft, you realize you probably got to be in the top 15 to 20 picks. Yep. They're at 31. How are they going to do this?
Well, you bring up the Philadelphia Eagles. When they made it to the Super Bowl in 2022, all 5 of their offensive linemen were either a Pro Bowler, an All-Pro, or a Pro Bowl alternate. Can you imagine what the 49ers would have been able to do really since 2021 when these offensive line issues started to come to the forefront if they fortified offensive line? And what doesn't make a lot of sense to me, this is an organization that's very smart, very well run. You don't make it to 4 NFC championship games in 5 years and 2 Super Bowls during that time frame if you're not a well-run organization. And they do a great job of drafting a lot of players, signing other players in free agency. And then this coaching staff and this scouting department, they've done a good job of pinpointing players, but also grooming them and developing them. The Niners, over the last couple of years, have had some of the most stacked rosters in the National Football League. But in 2021, how did they lose the NFC Championship game partially? You can talk about the Jaquiski Tart dropped interception, certainly. Trent Williams was hurt that game. What was the play that ended the game? Aaron Donald getting pressure on Jimmy Garoppolo. He tries to throw to JaMychal Hasty, goes off his hands, intercepted, game over. Niners blew a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter. Last year, NFC Championship game against Philadelphia. I know that they had Tyler Kroft on the perimeter lined up against Hassan Reddick. That was obviously a play that changed the entire game. I would have loved to have seen what the Niners were able to do full strength with Brock Purdy playing quarterback for 4 quarters instead of Josh Johnson coming in and then Christian McCaffrey having to throw passes in an NFC title game. But all throughout the NFC Championship game, the Niners got their asses kicked up front. And then you look back to what happened against Dallas. That game was really close because the Cowboys' defensive line manhandled the Niners up front against their offensive line. Even against Seattle in the wild card round, that game was close in the first half because Seattle's defensive line was able to play really well. We've been talking about offensive line being a porous unit for this team and the biggest weakness for 3 years now. And not only do they ignore it, not only do they not invest in it in the draft or free agency, last year they don't take, Larry, a single offensive lineman in the entire draft. They took a kicker and 2 tight ends in the draft. Cam Latu isn't even an NFL player. They took him in the 3rd round when
couldn't catch a cold.
Yeah, there were still really good offensive linemen on the board. And now with this great roster that you've had over the last 3 years. You've made it to 3 straight NFC championship games, 1 Super Bowl, and the consistent theme is that the offensive line has let this team down, and now you have a roster that's starting to get a little bit more expensive. You have a roster where the prime players are starting to get a little bit older, and now the pressure is on you, where I think going into 2024, this could be the last dance for a lot of the core players on this team when you talk about the bona fide dogs on this squad. Now, could the Niners make some major moves in free agency now? I do want to hit on that because NFL just announcing the salary cap was expected to be in the neighborhood of $243 million. It is going all the way up to $255 million. Mike Florio had a report the other day that maybe it was going to blossom to 250. 255 is a huge deal. So now the Niners have a lot more cap space.
Yeah.
And they have more financial capital at their disposal to spend on their own players like a Brandon Aiyuk. Maybe you don't have to cut or restructure some of the other contracts like a Kyle Juszczyk, a Dre Greenlaw. I know our cut candidates videos, Larry, causing controversy among the fan base. But can you pick up a Robert Hunt, right guard for the Dolphins in free agency, who is like a top 20 player in this free agency class? Can you address right tackle with Trent Brown, whose Pro Football Focus grades last year for the New England Patriots were really, really good, a former Niner who is still playing at a really high level? Trent Brown, 579 snaps at left tackle, 2 penalties, 3 sacks, 6 hits allowed, 17 pressures, Pro Football Focus grade of 80.2, run blocking grade of 80.7, and a pass blocking grade of 72.8. Now you have some financial wiggle room here where if you don't address offensive line in free agency or the draft, I just don't know what you're doing. And it's puzzling because this is a Niners team that loves to build in the trenches on the defensive side of the ball, yet you're ignoring the entire right side of the offensive line. And lastly, I didn't love the extension for Jake Brendel last year. He was a Pro Bowl alternate. Cool. He was an NFL journeyman for a reason. And when you were giving him $5 million per year, I thought there were better centers out there who you could have gotten for $5 million per. And that's why he's a cut candidate also.
Yeah, no question about it. And you saw the way he got pushed around in the Bengal game by DJ Reader. I mean, that was like, I felt like I was watching, a first round draft choice playing against FCS competition. I mean, he just got dominated. And let's talk about that because I titled the stream "Who Goes, Who Stays" in 49er free agency, and this was last night when I was putting this thumbnail together, or I should say, Kev was.
Good to meet Kev in Las Vegas, by the way. We talked for like 15, 20 minutes. It was good to catch up with him.
Yeah, Kev said it was great to meet you. But, when we were talking about today's stream, we were talking about, well, what are we going to talk about? And we were thinking the DC was going to be named this morning, and maybe it will be later today. There's a lot of talk about that. We'll talk about that in a second. But as you said, the NFL announced, this is the big story this morning, the salary cap jumps to $255.4 million. If you looked at the history of the cap over the last decade, it generally goes up $8 to $12 million a year. This is a significant jump. We're talking about a $30 million unprecedented increase per club. And it's really due to kind of a correction off of the COVID pandemic and some of the financial tentacles that touched that. So, I mean, just to give a breakdown, it went from 143 in 2015 to 155 in 2016 to 167 in 2017 to 177 in 2018, 188 in 2019. So you see where, and then last year it was 224.8. This year it's 255.4. And that doesn't, so the 49ers right now who were over the cap by like 4 million, are now under the cap by 834,000. And that's before the carryover. And I think they're going to carry over $20 million off their 2023 cap. So they're going to have some room to operate. Who do you like in free agency? I made a list the other day for a video that I did of guys that I really like. You already mentioned Trent Brown. Is there anybody else in free agency, Chase, that you're like, that would be a great Niner? Because one of the names that's being bandied about here quite often is Azeez Al-Shaair.
Yeah.
And I think that makes a lot of sense if Al-Shaair is willing to come back, just simply because he knows the defense, he knows the culture. He was on the sideline for Niners-Packers. And to me, that would be a great addition, especially because there wouldn't be any bad vibes as Greenlaw's trying to work his way back. I don't know how that's going to go down. But what do you think? Is there a free agent out there that you say, you know what, outside of Trent Brown, that would be a great fit?
Yeah, I like Robert Hunt at right guard and familiarity with Mike McDaniel's system. So that allows him to translate the Kyle Shanahan system pretty seamlessly. Very good in the run game, solid in pass protection. You sign him at right guard. You sign Trent Brown at right tackle. You make over your offensive line just like that. And what that allows you to do, I don't think that those players are going to get stupid money, but you can then draft some offensive linemen and start to groom them a little bit. And there's some really good prospects in this class that I talked about, which a video is going to come out on that coming up on the 49ers report. This is a great year for the Niners to need offensive linemen because this draft class is so deep, both with offensive linemen on the interior as well as tackles. And you're not going to be rushed into maybe having to play them right from the jump. Now, if you want to address free agency elsewhere outside of offensive line, then maybe you draft some of these players that are a little bit more affordable, and then you start to groom them. But if you don't want to play them right away and you do address it in free agency, maybe you get your future Trent Williams replacement coming down the pipeline a little bit. Maybe you get somebody who plays guard right now, but they can play and slide out to right tackle at some point in the future. So the wheels are turning a little bit, I imagine, for the Niners now, with them being under the cap, as you mentioned, with the salary cap increasing by 13.5%, with them just having some more financial wiggle room. So Robert Hunt, I like Trent Brown at right tackle. Azeez Al-Shaair, I think, would be a great addition. This is a Niners organization that really values linebacker. The backbone of their defense, you can make the argument, is kind of based on the linebacker position. And this has been the case for a really, really long time. Patrick Willis, Navarro Bowman, Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw. Azeez Al-Shaair a couple of years ago, when Dre Greenlaw was hurt, he had more than 100 tackles. And this year for Tennessee, Rand Carthon knew that this guy was a dog, that he was a good player. And that's why he brought him in. His first opportunity to be a full-time starter, fifth in the NFL in tackles, fifth in TFLs, really good at rushing the quarterback, really good at shooting the gaps in the run game. And now I like D Winters. I like Jalen Graham. I think what Johnny Holland, linebackers coach, has been able to do with all of the linebackers on this team who have been here for a while, or the new guys who really flashed in the preseason for me as late round picks, I think they can be good players. But are they ready to step in for Dre Greenlaw, who I just can't imagine is going to be able to return this year? And if he does, it's at the end of the year. So Azeez Al-Shaair knows the system. He was with the linebacking room before, I think, the Packers playoff game, dancing with them on the field. He used to room with Dre Greenlaw. He's a young, still an ascending player who I think would be a great scheme fit. You plug him in next to Fred Warner, you're not missing a beat at linebacker. And now that you have more dollars, do you go after a player like Brian Burns if he doesn't get franchise tagged by the Carolina Panthers? He would be a great edge rusher opposite of Nick Bosa, who has consistent production unlike Chase Young, consistent effort unlike Chase Young, and probably is going to be a little bit more expensive, but is a better player. Do you go after a guy like Bryce Huff of the New York Jets, who pass rush win rate was really, really good this past year, and you connect the dots, Robert, solid defensive system. He knows this scheme that the Niners are trying to pivot back toward, regardless of who the defensive coordinator is, because they're going to try to get back to their roots. So I look at those players. Cam Curl is an affordable safety, but I really like the future safety tandem of Talanoa Hufanga and Jair Brown. But if you don't want to extend a Talanoa Hufanga, do you go to the cheaper route with a guy like Cam Curl for Washington, who's still 25 years old, cerebral player, very, very physical? So the salary cap increasing opens up a lot of opportunities, and the Niners are under the cap right now. They can free up about $50 million if they restructure Trent Williams' contract, do the same for Debo and Eric Armstead, if they extend Fred Warner, and that's without maybe lowering the $14.1 million in guaranteed money for Brandon Aiyuk if they give him an extension. And of course, as part of this, before I throw it back to you, we got to talk about Aiyuk being more realistic now, because now that the cap goes up and is going to continue to increase because business is going to continue to be booming across the National Football League, does that increase the likelihood that Aiyuk can start to make more money than Deebo Samuel, which he deserves, and he can get the contract that he's certainly earned?
Those are so many good names there. I'm going to throw a few more your way. I love Kenny Moore, the Indianapolis slot corner. To me, I mean, they've got Mooney and they've got Lenore, and man, they could use one more corner. I love Kenny Moore. Aziz, we already mentioned. I could see Noah Fant if they wanted to move off of Juice. Maybe Noah Fant as a fullback, backup tight end. Sort of, to me, I think he could fit nice. A couple guys that I'm waiting to see if they get franchised: Jonathan Greenard from Houston, Kyle Duggar from New England. I'm a big fan of Sadiq Charles, who's the former LSU player in Washington. I think he might be an underrated offensive guard. Damian Lewis from Seattle, and one guy that to me would be a phenomenal ad is Willie Gay. Now, Willie Gay is just, I thought, really did a nice job defending Purdy in the Super Bowl. He's just so damn fast on that second level that he's got impact speed. But I love the ones you threw out. I think Bryce Huff might be the most underrated outside rusher in the game today. And, Trent Brown, Robert Hunt, Brian Burns. The one thing that when I looked into I did a deep dive on the draft, is I like there's a few edge rushers I like on day 2 and day 3. I don't love a lot of the edge pieces outside of the top 10.
Me either.
Once you get beyond Liatu from UCLA and Dallas Turner from Alabama, it really falls off. I don't see the Niners even having an option at defensive end with that first, that late first round pick. But let's talk about Duggar for a second. I agree with you that it's, Fafanga and Brown down the road. In fact, I don't think I would. The Niners have 20 free agents, Chase. I think I would let 15 of them go. And one of the 15 I would let go would be Tayshaun Gibson, who I just thought was a step slow against Kelsey in the Super Bowl in that second half. And I just think you could do better than Tayshaun Gibson. But that leads us to the D, and I didn't even mention Joey Bosa. What do you think of Joey Bosa? A lot of people are asking about Joey Bosa. Do you think Joey Bosa would take less money to come here if he gets cut?
I agree with you on Gibson. He's been a great story. Like when the Niners signed him going into 2022, signed him to the practice squad because of Jimmy Ward being injured. And then they signed him to the active roster because Ward was going to miss some time. Then Gibson played so well that they had to move Jimmy Ward to the slot because Gibson was really thriving alongside Talanoa Hufanga, who Gibson kind of credited with bringing this youthful nature back to him and revitalizing his career to a certain degree. I thought that Gibson was good for much of the year. And then the playoffs started to fall off a little bit. He got penalized a lot against Green Bay early. And you're so right. Travis Kelce was just in a different world as compared to Gibson. Look, Father Time is undefeated. He's just a little bit older, and he was a very serviceable and very quality safety for this team. I love Kyle Duggar because he's kind of that safety linebacker hybrid. I know you've been on the Bill Belichick movement to hire him as the next defensive coordinator. I would make my first call. I would have made my first call to Bill Belichick to be the next Niners DC because I'm trying to go all in to win a Super Bowl, knowing that this window is closing. But Bill Belichick, everybody's like, he's washed, he's cooked, he's old. That defense was a top 10 unit last year. And if he loves Kyle Duggar, I love Kyle Duggar because Bill Belichick knows DBs, and Duggar can play deep safety. He can mix it up around the line. He can play in the slot, little hybrid linebacker. I think that he'd be a really solid player. Joey Bosa is a fascinating conversation because when he's been on the field, he's been really productive. But over the last 2 years, he played 5 games in 2022 with 4 starts. And then this year, he played 9 games with 5 starts. So that's a total of 14 games the last 2 years. And what really worries me, very good production throughout his career. Rookie year, 10.5 sacks. Year 2, 12.5. And then the injuries start to pile up. 7 games in year 3, 16 in year 4, 12 after that, 16, and then 5 and 9 the last 2 years. For a big guy who relies on his strength, power, mobility, athleticism, quick twitch, him and Nick are just pass rush technicians, a lot of foot injuries. And big guys who have foot injuries, I don't care what sport, basketball, football, they're just problematic. So the Chargers would save $14 million in cutting him. And they could cut him. They could cut Keenan Allen, Mike Williams to free up a bunch of capital for Jim Harbaugh in his first year. I think those are smart moves for LA. You have quarterback. You have some other really good players on that team. You can survive without them. You cut Khalil Mack. That saves you a lot of money as well. If there's a Chargers edge who I'm going to go after, it's a Khalil Mack. I don't think it's a Joey Bosa. The conversation is fun. Nick, Joey, reuniting his brothers. But he's just been injured way too much. And I know Nick had said we'd take over the NFL. Yeah, you might if he's healthy.
For a
but
month.
He's just not healthy enough.